One of the great things about Jacqueline Wilson characters, certainly her protagonists, are that they are usually, for the most part, very innocent, often juvenile individuals who tend to make good decisions, but they are in bad situations. With Bad Girls, which was initially released in 1996, I was 4 years old at the time. I didn't read it until maybe 2003, 2004. We have our protagonist Mandy, who befriends somebody who then leads her to getting in with, well, not necessarily the wrong crowd, but starts to make some bad choices. And it's quite interesting. Now, certainly at this point, that was quite rare for a Jacqueline Wilson protagonist, and certainly had quite a different and interesting tone. In later books, there are certain characters, I think maybe Katie comes to mind, where they're a bit more boisterous and not necessarily as sweet and innocent as the majority of her protagonists are. Bad Girls is one that as a child I was kind of intimidated by, and I think that's mainly because of the character of Tanya, who I didn't trust, and it made me feel uncomfortable reading this, which is the point, and I will talk about that more in a moment. So, very briefly, the description from Wikipedia sums this up without spoiling anything, and this says, the book revolves around a 10-year-old girl called Mandy being bullied by 3 girls called Kim, Sarah, and Melanie. She later befriends a wayward teenage girl called Tanya, who is in foster care and battling her own personal demons. Tanya is 14 and is a frequent shoplifter. I'm not going to say any more about, why that happens. The novel, as it progresses, does give some reasons for why that might be and where her own personal demons stem from. But I don't want to give away too much of that because I don't want to ruin the narrative. But obviously, as Mandy befriends her, she looks up to Tanya in some ways and sees Tanya as a protective, almost big sister figure. And by looking up to her, she spends time with her. And with Tanya being a shoplifter, Mandy is getting into some sticky situations. I'm not going to say anything more than that. The moral in this, the message is very clear, very obvious. Don't steal. Bad things will happen to you if you steal. But it's also, I don't know, maybe I don't know if I would have picked up on this when I read this as a child, but certainly as an adult reader, I can see some reasons for Tanya's behaviour and the poor decisions that she's been making. So as an adult reader, it might provide some insight into the psychology of that character. And, if you know somebody who's doing something similar and has been through a similar situation, maybe you can help to unpack some of that with them. So from that aspect, I think it's, really, really quite an eye-opening read. As I said, I was quite intimidated by Tanya. I was nervous. I think the first time I read this, it would have been several years later when I read it the second time. So the first time I read it, I don't remember everything about it exactly. I have read it several times since, but I do remember, I don't even know if I finished it the first time I read it when I was maybe 10. I might have been slightly younger. I was reading Jacqueline Wilson from about 7 or 8. So it would have been maybe about a year or so after that. And I honestly don't know if I even got to the end. So I will say it's not going to be for everybody. If you've read some of her more likeable protagonist stories, which is basically everything that was written before this and most of the stuff afterwards, Mandy is likeable, but Tanya is challenging if she's not your kind of person. But it's also good that she speaks to several different types of readers with this one narrative. And that's also something that doesn't happen a lot in pretty much any book, but also in her books. Because usually the people the characters are friends with they have similar personalities. Yeah, we get things like the Butterfly Club where that's not necessarily the case. But often if a character is going to be friends with somebody, it's because they have similar interests. This one, obviously, not the case. Really enlightening, really eye-opening. Reading it as an adult, I get a different experience and different emotions to what I did, absolutely to what I did as a child. As I said, I think I would have read it the second time, maybe early teens, and I definitely remember finishing it at that point, and the emotions were different, what I took from it was not as negative from the first time I read it. So I think, although it's kind of the average, I think maybe, let's say 7 to 12 reading group, maybe 9 to 12, it would depend on what that individual reader looks for in a book. I'd say it's definitely one of her most unique in terms of the characters presented. The narrative follows a pretty typical journey of learning and character development. Really, although it gave me made me quite nervous when I first read it, it's brilliant. It's a great achievement. Nobody else is writing characters like this. I can't really fault it.